Welcome to Strategies for Financial Survival with Michael Figueroa. When financial adversity hits, and it very well may hit you, it's those that educate themselves and use their skills that will survive, no matter what field you're in. Now, here's your host, Michael Figueroa.
Welcome, everyone, to the show. This is Mike Figueroa. Happy New Year. Hope this year brings good wishes and prosperity and good health to everyone. Today, we're going to start out the year with property management. So what generally we've been talking about is my real estate experience. And one of the main areas has always been the idea of how do you buy, fix up, and sell property. And you can use these ideas and skills in any business that you do. For today, we're going to talk about property management when you are looking at or have bought a rental property and you're going to rent it out for a while. What are the trials and tribulations of dealing with doing that type of business? And, of course, I've been my first when I was 23, 24 years old, so I got shot a lot in the backside for knowing what I should know. And today I have a lot more experience, obviously. Today our guest is Pat Dandino. I will introduce Pat a little bit down the line here. And he has been in the property management business for something close to 25 years. And he has a lot of experience in what happens, how you deal with the issues, what do you do in case problems come up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about different parts, and Pat will come in and gives his experience on that. And we'll try to accomplish a analysis over this hour in property management. So, Pat, let me introduce you to our listeners. Pat Dandino. Pat, will you give a little resume of your experience in the business?
Michael, thank you, and good morning. I have been in the property acquisition and property management business full-time since 1978, so I believe that gives me 35, 36 years experience. I actually grew up in the business. My mom and dad were in the apartment rental business, and grandparents on both sides of the family were in the apartment rental business. So actually it may be a little more than 1978 because I could remember helping my parents and grandparents on day-to-day management.
Okay. I lost you there for a minute. Go ahead.
I could remember helping my grandparents with and parents with management of the apartment buildings and rental properties as far back as when I was 7 years old. So this truly is my chosen profession, property management.
So, Pat, we're going to go through a little bit of each type of item that I've outlined for you. And give me your experience on them when I go through some of these questions. And then we're going to save some of the war stories for the end that everyone needs to understand if they're ever going to get into this business. So the first thing is, let's say you have bought a property or you have inherited a property and you're now looking to rent this property. What is the first thing you do in order to determine what you can rent the property for?
Okay, I'll take property, meaning it could be a single-family house, it could be an apartment building of many different units, or it could be a commercial property. How do I personally determine how much I could rent it for? Usually before I buy a property, I'll do in my due diligence stage, I will see what the property is renting for, and I will study the property and I'll study the market to see if I am at a level where my rents should stay where they're at, or if there's a room for increase. And we always hope that there's room for an increase. I will also go out into the market and look at comparable type properties. And I'll study my competition. Am I on a level playing field with them? Are my rental properties superior to theirs? Or do they have more to offer than my property? And I'll do my adjustment accordingly. But when you're in this business long enough, Michael, as you already know, you pretty much from experience get a gut feeling on what things should rent for. And most of the time you're correct.
One of the things that I noticed is that one of the biggest problems is so many people, when they're renting properties, you find that they're very dirty a lot of times, and like showers and kitchens haven't been cleaned, and so when you deal in renting, how do you clean? How do you structure it so that when you check somebody in, you know what the status is, everybody understands it, because there's always going to be an argument when you leave, and I do this when I'm judging down at the justice court, where you get the tenant saying, "Oh, I left the place better than when I found it," and then there's always that type of argument that goes back and forth. How do you check somebody in, and what do you do to do that?
That's a great point, Michael. Here's how I deal with my rental properties. When somebody comes to look at my rental property, whether it's a house or an apartment building or light commercial, they're in excellent condition. They'll pull up to the property. The exterior, the yard is well groomed. The exterior is well painted and looks good. The yard's in good order. All of my interior rooms, everything looks good. You could go down a checklist: walls, electrical, flooring, lighting, bathroom. And I've had people tell me throughout the years, my rental properties are some of the nicest that they've looked at, and I take pride because it's my business. So when I rent a property, I put it out in great condition, and I expect it back in great condition. And how I do that is I structure a lease that is fair for all parties involved. And in that lease, it explains that they're getting the property in good order, and I expect it back in good order, minus normal wear and tear, and I stress the word normal. But another thing that I do is I give the tenant the departing checklist the day they move in the property, and we go over it line by line, page by page, and I have them sign it, date it, and initial it as required. So there's no surprises when they move out. They know how they took the property, and they've already agreed to return it in a good condition. Fast forwarding that a little bit, when people are moving out or they give notice that they're moving out at the end of the lease, I'll give them a copy of that departing checklist that they signed as they were moving in, and just tell them, hey, go line by line through the departing checklist and give me a call on the last day of your lease, and I'll come in and I'll do a final walkthrough with you. We'll go room by room off the checklist. And if everything's in good order, as we agreed to, I'll be delighted to return your security deposit back to you in full.
Now, do you ever take pictures of the property going in and out? I found that when I'm dealing with this in court, that usually speaks a lot, especially when I'm sitting as a judge and I see pictures of the before and after. It really works well to tell me what's going on. Do you use that technique?
Michael, that's a good point, and not always, but yes, lately I have been. And what I do is I'll get a disposable camera. I know it's not the latest in technology, but I'll take pictures of the outside and inside of the property in detail. I'll get the pictures processed in double, and I'll have the tenant initial them and date the back of them. So then there's no disagreement if it had to go to court. And yes, pictures do speak for themselves.
Okay, yeah, I found that to be very useful. Now, when you interview a tenant, Do you do background checks, credit reports? I know that there are services out there that primarily, beside the credit report, they do criminal background checks. Especially, you want to find out if the tenant has been evicted from the last property or has a history of being evicted.
Another great point. Yes, I do. My application seems to be lengthy but fair, and I'll give an application to people to fill out, and I'll tell them, please take your time filling this out. Only when I get a completed application back can I continue with the process. I'll go line by line on my application to make sure that everything that the prospective tenant has provided to me is truthful and accurate. I also want a full credit report. I want to see if there's any issues in there that bring the credit report, shown on the credit report. I also do a background check. I want to make sure that someone doesn't have a history of evictions or has a pattern of cheating landlords. And I also want to make sure that somebody's not going to use the property for illegal reasons. That's why I use a crime-free addendum in all my leases.
Have you had experiences where you have had issues come up because of this, and how did you deal with it while you're in the interview process with the tenant?
I'll tell you something that I do get often is on people's credit report, they have judgments for medical bills. And that's pretty common where somebody has an illness or a medical procedure that they can't afford to pay or they're paying on. And usually with a little bit of explanation, we could work through that. But if you get people that have a history of bad things, evictions, huge collections, a pattern of irresponsibility, some criminal problems, we need to talk about that because there are things that can disqualify a person at any apartment complex. So we're kind of careful who we put in the apartment because we want a nice place to call home for all of our tenants.
Now, when we pick someone and we're going through the process, the issues that come up will be the lease. And one of the big issues in a lease a lot of times deals with pets and the number of people that are going to be there. Of course, I've had situations in my history as owning rentals where a nice couple comes, they interview, they look really good, they have a nice clean car, and you kind of want to make sure that you got some decent people. And then one day you go to the property after they move in and there's 8 or 9 other people there. There are multiple pets. The place starts to look ragged. And one thing I like to mention to you, this one friend of mine who used to do property management, well, he used to deal for his own property. After he took the application and was doing the interview, he would then go to the home of the people that are renting, wherever they're living, their apartment, their house, and more or less say, by the way, I forgot, I wanted to deliver you a copy of this, or I forgot to give you this to fill out and sign. And he would take a look at the property that they were in and how they lived, and hopefully he got invited in their place, and that gave him a really good idea about how his property is going to look like. And I remember that story, and it was something that stuck with me as being an excellent way to check out what's going to happen if the people came in. And of course, a lot of times the place was immaculate and wonderful, and every so often it wasn't. Have you experienced any of that?
All good points. I have gone to the current resident where they're living now prior to them moving in my rental. If everything looks good, that's a good sign. If there's problems, well, it's good to know prior to them getting into your apartment. Now, you mentioned something about people exceeding the number of occupants. That can and does happen. So I'm pretty clear in my lease. I have provisions in my lease where it lists who's going to be in the property. If it's the parents and children, how many children are there, and what are their names, and what are their ages? Let's know who's going to be living in the property. If I were to come across a situation where there were unauthorized occupants, first of all, I would investigate and ask, are these visitors, or are these people that are going to be staying here? Another thing you have to be careful with, you have to look at your municipalities and see what their rules are, how many people per square feet. You don't want to run into a problem where you're having code violations.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So I've really not had that problem, but there are provisions in my lease that prepare me for problems or prevent those problems. Now, you also talked about pets. As you know, I love animals, and I take good care of my animals. But some people don't take good care of their animals, and they let their animals become destructive. It's not the animal's fault, it's the person controlling that animal. So on the rare occasion that I do allow a pet, I have something called a pet addendum. And it's lengthy, and it's strict, and it is very clear what the expectations are if you're going to have a pet. And usually when I do have a pet, I'll ask for a pet deposit or more security deposit. Because if you have to start replacing carpets and floor coverings and doors, it's going to far exceed the security deposit. So that's why I'm kind of big on pet addendums and an extra deposit in the event that there is a pet. And another thing I've learned over the years to be very careful with is, and you'll understand this from your legal background, is dogs and dog bites. If you have a dog on the property and that dog bites another tenant, in all likelihood there's going to be a lawsuit, and you're going to get pulled in that lawsuit. So word to the wise is be very careful when dealing with dogs, and be extra careful when dealing with large, aggressive breed dogs, because if there's an incident of biting, you're probably going to get pulled into litigation as the property owner or property manager.
Good point. Good point. We've got to take our first break here, so let's do that, and we'll come back and talk to you more about the issues of as the tenant is there, and then after we do checkout, and then some landlord-tenant law. See everybody in a few.
We're always talking business. Talk to an expert. Call now toll free 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Voice America Business Network.
At Intuitive Strategies, LLC, we provide services to our clients that help them develop a strong education in business. And we also help them to develop a strategy that will allow them to turn their skills into a profit, protect their business and personal assets, and plan for a successful retirement. Our consulting and structuring services include business analysis, budget analysis, management analysis, ability to raise capital from investors, tax planning to minimize tax liability under code, as well as legal structure to protect business from frivolous lawsuits. Intuitive Strategies also provides document preparation services, such as business structuring documents, documents that establish an entity, management agreements, retirement plans, estate planning, wills, and trusts. Let Intuitive Strategies help you with your business. Visit intuitivestartup.com or call us in Tucson at 520-425-8759. Visit intuitivestartup.com today. When it comes to business, you'll find the experts here. Voice America Business Network. You are listening to Strategies for Financial Survival with your host, Michael Figueroa. If you have a question or comment about the program, please send us an email to support at intuitivestartup.com. That's support at intuitivestartup.com. Now, back to Strategies for Financial Survival.
Welcome back, everyone, and we're speaking with Pat Dandino on property management. And so we've gone through the point of how do you pick a potential tenant, and how do you screen them and their move-in, and now they are living at the house and issues come up. And a lot of times I remember the issues are repair-oriented. And I got some just this week with hot water that didn't work, the heater went out. So I that from my experience, one of the things that's very important is you want to make sure that whether it's the summer that's coming or the winter that's coming, that you structure the necessary repairs and work that has to be done so that when the weather is, let's say, 30 degrees or 15 degrees and the heater is out because it hasn't had a filter change for a while, all of a sudden everybody's calling the heating and cooling guy for repairs, and you get the answer back, well, I can get there next week or next month, but I can't get there before then, and you got screaming people and you got to deal with it. So one thing I've done very clearly is make sure that prior to all these things coming, that I've had the property maintained as best as I can so I don't have these crisis calls. The other part is a lot of times you get stopped up sewers, toilets, kitchen sinks, and so I want to ask Pat, how do you deal with what you cover versus what the tenant covers, and do you express this in your lease agreement and some of the issues that you've seen normally that pop up?
Good questions, Michael. Some issues are addressed in the lease, but as we already know, you can't put every possible scenario on paper. So here's what I do. I am real big on having quality rentals, and I'm also very big on preparedness. We already know it's going to be cold in the winter, and we already know it's going to be hot in the summer. So let's get a head start. Let's have a maintenance program. Have your furnaces and heaters ready and safe for the winter. Have your cooling systems up and ready for the first hot day. What I like to do is I like to treat my people the same way, the same treatment I would expect if I was renting an apartment. And that has worked out very well for me for the last 35 years. Now, from time to time, we do come across unforeseen or unexpected maintenance issues. Somebody calls and they say, Pat, my toilet stopped up. I'll go there, or I'll send a qualified repairman to go there. If it's a normal maintenance issue, we correct it promptly. We don't want things to go on, and we'll correct it. However, I've come across situations where somebody has flushed a dowel down the toilet. And how do we know it's a dowel? Because when we're snaking the line, the snake grabs the dowel and we pull the dowel back out. And folks, I didn't put the dowel down there. You or someone under your control put the dowel down there, so you're going to be responsible for this repair. Things like that do happen. And things like that should be expected in the rental and property management business. It's just part of the business. But we're always big on getting it fixed promptly.
So generally, what do you cover as the landlord, and what do you require the tenant to cover?
What I repair as a landlord or property manager is if something with the property breaks or wears out or normal wear and tear and it just malfunctions, I take care of it promptly. If a refrigerator goes out and it's mine, I'll get it fixed or I'll replace it. If there's a roof leak, of course, the roof is mine. I'll have a roofer out there to repair it. If a heating and cooling system malfunctions, I'll take care of it. Things like that, things that are mine, things that go with the property. The things that I don't cover are abuse and damage. If there's a broken window, how did it break? if there's a hole in the wall or a door frame kicked in. Well, we're going to look at this and we're going to find out why it happened, and somebody is going to have to reimburse me for the damages.
Okay, so that makes sense. I can see that, and especially if you have in your agreement everything written out clearly, it deletes it minimizes the fighting with the resident on as to who's going to pay the bills. So, utilities. What do you generally pay, if anything, and what's your recommendation? Because I know I find if I'm paying for any utilities, they are wasted a lot of times. The doors are open to heat and cool the neighborhood. The water is used to water everybody's swimming pool. And this is not all the time what happens, of course. But if the tenant is paying the utilities, they're very self-conscious about making sure that they don't waste it. So what's your policy on that? What have you seen?
Well, as always, on my leases, it clearly shows who's paying what. What I have found out on a single-family house, the tenant usually pays the gas, the electric, the water, and the trash pickup. However, on apartment buildings, tenants could pay just the electric, on occasion the electric and gas, but the landlord, because it's under 1 meter for the whole building, the landlord will pay the water. So I tell people, in order for me to keep the rents down, please be respectful to my water bill. And I also tell tenants, if you have a water leak or there is a toilet running, please tell me, because that is money going down the drain. I've had instances where I've noticed a water bill was a little high, and I'll put a memo out to the building. Any leaks, let me know. We could correct them promptly. Other times I have found out that people were washing their cars on Saturdays and Sundays. Had to put a stop to it just because the water bill was getting too high.
Yeah. What about landscaping? Do you require landscaping especially on homes, to be maintained at your cost or at the tenant's cost?
On my single-family rental homes, I have there's a portion in the lease that spells out the tenant's responsibilities for yard maintenance, grooming the yard, trimming, pruning, raking, disposal of the yard waste. And I also need to let them know that if there's an automatic irrigation system on the property, let me know if it's not malfunctioning, because we don't want plants to start drying up and dying. On those properties that don't require an automatic irrigation system but need occasional watering, I'll tell the tenant, please take a hose and water on occasion. And if they don't have a hose, they're cheap enough, I'll buy a hose for them.
I found a lot of times when I'm, again, dealing with the judging, I find claims by landlords that the landscaping has been destroyed either by pets or neglect, and that's why one of the things that's important is to get the pictures and make sure that that's in order.
Pictures are very important, yes. And there's also, once again, I'll revert back to my lease. There's something very important in my lease that notes all interior, exterior items in the yard are at good condition at move-in. If there's any exceptions, let's talk about them now before you move in. If there's a dead plant or a dead tree, let's talk about it now so there's no disagreements 12 months down the road.
Yeah, definitely is how you want to it's handled so that you don't have arguments about this stuff later on. So we have, let's say the tenant is doing good. They decide to move and buy a house, and now we have checkout. So when dealing with the checkout, describe the process that you generally do when the lease comes up.
Okay. Going back to earlier in our conversation, I mentioned that I do something called a departing checklist right at move, and I have the tenant review it, date it, sign it, and initial it where required. We'll use that very same departing checklist that we signed 12 months earlier. I do my walkthroughs by appointment and during daylight hours, so everybody can see everything. Nothing is camouflaged by the night. And we'll go room by room. And we'll take a look at ceilings, walls, floors, door trim, windows, carpeting, light fixtures, ceiling fans in each room. We'll take a good look at the bathrooms. We'll take a good look at the kitchens. We'll inspect appliances in and out for damage. We'll take a good walk on the outside. We'll take a good walk through on the yard. And I always pay attention to the alley that there's not truckloads of garbage back there that the scavenger service won't pick up, and I get stuck with calling someone to take it to the dump. And that's also something that I put in my lease. If something doesn't fit in the garbage can, and you know the garbage company's not going to pick it up, it is your responsibility to have it hauled away or taken to the dump, because I don't want to get stuck with paying for that bill. We continue our walkthrough on the property. Yes, at times there are problems, and we will note that on the departing checklist. If there's something wrong, let's jot it down. Then what I'll do is I'll give the tenant the opportunity to have their qualified repair service come in promptly and immediately and correct it to my liking in a proper way. If they can't do it, I'll get my own qualified repair people in there to fairly and skillfully make the repair, and I will deduct it from their security deposit, and I will give them an exact accounting with receipts and invoices what it did cost to make one repair or numerous repairs.
So let me mention a couple of things that I know I've dealt with, and I know that you have. So people move out, and they move out without really doing a checkout with you at the same time. So all of a sudden, you have to send your 14-day letter once they're out, or once they have deemed to have abandoned the property. And a lot of times you may not know whether there's an abandonment or not based on the fact that there's still stuff on the property. And I've had cars that you can't move because the wheels are off, and then personal property, furniture, clothing. I think we've all seen that. So in a lot of cases, the rent is due because they haven't checked out, but they are in fault. They seem to have moved out. The property is still there. And so what is the process that you do to determine whether you've been given the property back by abandonment or they're still there? Because inevitably, again, I found situations both as a landlord and as a judge where somebody will say, yes, I left this $5,000 diamond ring in my dresser there, and the landlord took it. And all of my expensive Gucci clothing and my Picassos are all gone, and I'm entitled to $100,000 of damages. So when you get that situation, and I know you have, I presume you have, how do you handle those issues?
Okay, if a tenant moves out prior to the lease, or you've determined that they've broken the lease and they've moved out early, I can't stress the importance of sound legal advice. And I know laws and regulations vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So what I have is an attorney in town that deals specifically with a landlord-tenant issue, landlord rights. And I will follow the sound legal advice given to me by that attorney, just so there's no misunderstandings down the road. If somebody has moved and their lease is up, and you made a point of they left a abandoned car on the property, there are towing companies in this town that, by law, they come onto the property, they take the car, and they bring it to their yard, and they take care of everything from that point. So you've accomplished two things. You've done it legally. Someone has taken the car off your property, and it is now between the towing company and the owner of the car to see where it goes from there.
Now, what about personal property, abandoned clothes and furniture and things inside the unit?
Okay, once again, that's where photo documentation and witnesses are very important. You take a lot of pictures as to what was left. In my lease, I do put something. Personal property left behind at the end of the lease will be, we will not be accountable for it. However, if I do find something that is very important, and over the years I have, I'll find photo albums or people leave some important documents behind. I'll take it and I'll put it in safekeeping for them and contact them. And they could tell me how to get it back to them, or they'll make arrangements to come pick it up, or have a designated person come to pick it up for them. About 2 years ago, I had someone leave a wedding ring in a property, and they called me panicked from the airport. And that was kind of a priority. I asked them, tell me where to look for it, and I'll get on this promptly. And sure enough, it was left in the nightstand. I took possession of it, contacted them, and they told me how they wanted it returned to them. And it was successfully returned to them.
Yeah, I've seen situations where people have abandoned property. One I know, and I don't know why it happened, but a property went trustee sale, and I took possession of the property, and everything was in the property as if they were going to come back in an hour or so. And so I left everything as is and put a note on that the property went to trustee sale. And I wasn't sure whether the person was that was there was the owner or the tenant. There was no evidence of that. And inevitably at the end of about I think it was 15 days of not seeing or hearing anybody at the property and trying to locate them, we boxed everything up, and things that are good we saved, just like you did. Well, it looks like we have another break. When we come back, we'll talk about some war stories, I call them, and some other business ideas on how to utilize a rental property, and maybe some other areas that we'll think of as we come through to the end of the hour. I'll see you in a few minutes.
Voice America Business Network, the bottom line in business.
At Intuitive Strategies, LLC, we provide services to our clients that help them develop a strong education in business. And we also help them to develop a strategy that will allow them to turn their skills into a profit, protect their business and personal assets, and plan for a successful retirement. Our consulting and structuring services include business analysis, budget analysis, management analysis, ability to raise capital from investors, tax planning to minimize tax liability under code, as well as legal structure to protect business from frivolous lawsuits. Intuitive Strategies also provides document preparation services, such as business structuring documents, documents that establish an entity, management agreements, retirement plans, estate planning, wills, and trusts. Let Intuitive Strategies help you with your business. Visit intuitivestartup.com or call us in Tucson at 520-425-8759. Visit intuitivestartup.com today.
From the boardroom to you, Voice America Business Network.
You are listening to Strategies for Financial Survival with your host, Michael Figueroa. If you have a question or comment about the program, please send us an email to support@intuitivestartup.com. That's support@intuitivestartup.com. Now, back to Strategies for Financial Survival.
Welcome back, everyone, and we are speaking with Pat Dandino regarding property management. So we've gone through the last situation talking about if and when the tenant leaves, they may leave the property in great condition. They get their money back. There's usually an accounting. The statute requires that any money that's being withheld from a tenant's security deposit be outlined, and this letter be sent within 14 days after the tenant has abandoned the property or left the property. So if you have an abandonment, then you have to establish the abandonment by other rules. We may deal with that in another session. But now let's go to this part. There is a tendency, and it makes good sense to, let's say, I'm going to rent a property that I like, and I want a right to buy it at the end. Or the landlord or the company that owns the property says, well, how about this? If you rent the property, we give you a right to buy it. So it's a lease with an option to buy. And in those arrangements, usually I like to structure, and I'll tell you a story about that in a minute, of how to restructure a purchase option so that you keep the place up, it works out well, and then you convert it into an ownership. So Pat, tell your ideas about who and how often you look at a lease with an option if you have a property you'd like to sell.
Okay, if somebody is interested in buying the property, if they want to remain a tenant for a while and then buy it later down the road, what we'll do is we'll incorporate that language into the lease, and we'll probably we will create an addendum that says exactly that. And what you're going to want to do is agree on an asking price. But most importantly is, if these folks are going to buy this house from you, let's make sure right now or in the very near future that they are financially able to do it. We don't want to get to a point where we're waiting endlessly for someone to get an approval on a loan only to find out that they can't be approved at this time. So it's always better to find out sooner than later. Will they be able to buy at a given time? Can they afford the house? So let's start going through some groundwork early on to see if this is a good financial fit for them. Most importantly, if they're going to require financing, let's get them to a mortgage broker right now. Let's get some type of an idea on yes, no, or maybe that they can be buyers at some point.
Dad, that makes really good sense. What do you generally look at when you're doing an option? What type of down payment? What type of terms? Do you have any standard item that is required in your agreements, or do they float all over depending on the situation?
It's going to depend on a situation. Of course, we're going to want to establish an asking price, but that asking price is going to be subject to an appraisal in the purchase process. And of course, that could change. In today's market, something may be worth a little less or a little more than what you want for it. And that is usually discovered during the loan process, during the appraisal process. When somebody does get to a point where they are going to buy the house, that is the time when we're going to send them to a lender to start application if they haven't started already. That is the point where we're going to put a purchase contract together, whether they do it through an attorney or whether it's done through a title company or whether it's done by a realtor. We are going to establish a purchase contract because we're going to need it to get to a closing.
So let me mention a couple of stories here on this. One thing that I did as a college student that was kind of interesting and it worked out well. You know, a lot of college kids get together and they rent a big house, and then they each rent a room and they all chip in together and pay the rent that way. What I did was I determined that I would find a house maybe somewhere around the university or anywhere basically, and I would primarily look for an owner who was not a professional landlord. And usually you'd see a for rent sign in the window, the grass is high, the property needs a lot of maintenance, and or it could be a sign that is more professional, but the property looks run down. And when I found those, I would contact the owner, and a lot of times the owner happened to be, it could be anything like a person that inherited the property from a relative that passed away, could be someone that was like university employees who they rented it or bought the property for their child, their daughter, their son. During college years, those children graduated, they moved on, and the property is now up for rent, and the person is not a professional landlord. And so when I contacted those people, I usually found kind of aggravated, angry, talking about how the last tenant trashed the property and they don't really have the money to fix it up, and they're angry about that. And I'd say, well, here's what I'd like to do. You're asking, let's say, $600 a month for this 4-bedroom house. I'd be willing to give you $400 a month, and I'll give you cash up front for 1 year. I will be responsible for all utilities and all repairs except, let's say, roof and heating cooling unit. But everything else I'm responsible for. And I would have an option to buy the property at today's price. So what I would do is I would go to that person. I would then put, let's say, a year's worth of dollar bills on the table of the rent at the discounted amount. So remember, they're asking $6, I'm offering them $4. And in my lease arrangement, I would say that 30 days before the expiration of the first year, I'd have to come in with 6 months more of rent. And then the last year, which is my 3-year lease, it would be month to month, and I don't put any new money up other than the monthlies. But it was structured as a $400 a month arrangement through the end. Now, I may or may not agree to pay the taxes and the insurance depending on what type of transaction I'm trying to do. But of course, I'd budget that in as a cost, so that the landlord looks at that and says, hey, I'm not getting my $600, but and I try to explain this, if I was to pay the $600, you would have to pay the repairs, generally, the taxes, all the hassle with this up front, it's going to be highly unlikely that you're going to have to deal with all these problems. So for security and peace of mind, you now are able to put this aside and move. Now, going back to the lease option, when I'm able to have an option to buy the property for a fixed price for 3 years, and back in those days, everything was inflation up instead of decline down. So I would then lease the rooms out to college students so that I'd get about $675, $700. So I'd have a cash flow on top of what I'm paying out, and I'd collect that in, and then I'd usually get the college students to fix up and clean the property for some rent credit. So they paint it and do the roof and do different things, because again, if I have the option, that's what I'd like. And in my option, I would structure the financing. So it would say that whenever I could do this, that the price, let's say, was $60,000 at the end of 3 years, and that my payments would be $600 a month for the next 10 years, at which time the property would be, or the note would be all due and payable. And I may do a 25-year amortization, again, with a 10-year stop date. So doing it that way, I was able to sell the property at the end of the period and recover all of my money plus make a profit. And that situation worked out really well. Have you ever done anything like that or thought of that as an idea?
Michael, I personally have not, but that is a creative and an acceptable way to own property. It sounds like what you were doing is you were renting the property with the understanding that you could sublease, and you were also gaining control of the property without buying it. You were getting some rental income that more than covered your expenses and put some profit in your pocket. During the time you were doing that, the property was increasing in value, and say in 1990 you would have theoretically entered a deal like that, and then your 10-year stop came up in 2000. Well, what you agreed to pay $60 on, you probably turned a handsome profit, because over a 10-year period, one can expect to see some nice appreciation in any type of a rental property.
Yeah, and see, you can do that again nowadays, and with money being tight, that those situations might work. The other thing I found was that a lot of times the owner, their primary objective was to get the problem off their back. They don't want to be a landlord. They inherited the property. They got it in a situation that they wouldn't normally do, and they just wanted to be out of it. So the other part that I found was the carryback situation. If, like today, interest, if you put money in a checking account, well, a savings CD is 1%, maybe 2% if you're really lucky, if you tie it up for years. Well, if you're offering someone 6% or 5% today, that might be really good for that person to say, I can get a cash flow out of my mortgage. I don't have to worry about it. If the mortgage is under, let's say, if you fixed up the property and it reappraises on my $60,000 deal for $80,000 or $90,000, and the mortgage is down at $60,000, that person that holds the mortgage is pretty secure that they're going to come out okay on that arrangement. So it's a good deal for both the landlord and the tenant in the situation where you want to get rid of a property and not be burdened by dealing with the issues. So we have a minute to go, Pat, and do you have any closing thoughts on anything that you thought of from our interview today?
I do, Michael. Thank you for asking. In my 35 years in the business, I've owned a little more than 100 personally owned properties. And I have found out that when you treat it like a business, when you manage your properties properly, either by yourself or through a competent property management company, it's a great business. But you have to treat it like a business.
And so the key things there are do not make emotional decisions. Stick with a business plan. That's another good one. Keep away from renting to friends and relatives, especially when you can't control your emotions on the deal, because then you'll wind up, as the old saying goes, with no friends and no relatives you can talk to.
That can happen, Michael, but no, once again, it's a great business. Have a business plan. And most people that enter the real estate business, whether they're buying a rental house or an apartment building, do have a solid business plan. But remember, this is not a hobby. It involves capital, and it involves a sound business plan. But the rewards are great at the end.
Very good, Pat. Thank you for being on the show today, and we will talk to you again. And thanks to everyone for listening in, and we'll see you at our next show that comes on at the same time. And Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you again for tuning in to Strategies for Financial Survival. Please join host Michael Figueroa again next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Business Channel. Until the next show, survive and succeed.
Thanks again for listening to the preceding program, brought to you on the Voice America Business Channel. For more information about our network and to check out additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericabusiness.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the preceding program are strictly those of the hosts or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.